Hi guys, how's it going? Ivano here. And look, here's the truth. The days where Arsenal ruled the war zones are unfortunately over. Now, us mercenary enjoyers can only reminisce about the days when we were ruling the hardball arena, spamming tracer missile all day long, carrying our noob teammates wearing our battlemaster gear. Mercenaries ruled supreme and everything was right in the world. Then came the times when the devs decided to turn Mercenary into an unkillable war machine. You know, all those utilities in the combat style tree which you now have to choose between. Yep, you could have all those at the same time. But then Legacy of the Sith came along. But nevertheless, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And there is nothing tougher than a bounty hunter Arsenal Mercenary. So, since you're still here, I have good news and bad news. Good news, Arsenal has been buffed in patch 7.3.1, and even more good news, this is a 2-in-1 guide. Meaning, I will give you not one, but two builds for Arsenal, both of which are relatively easy to play, and if you follow them, you will have a very tanky ranged DPS with good utility to support your team and secure kills with your Electronet. Bad news, no matter what you do, your DPS kind of sucks. Why? Well, because Arsenal is a range burst class, which not only gets countered by the stuff that all the other burst classes get countered by, tanks, but also they get railed pretty hard by literally any defensive cooldown in the game because of its reliance on white damage. That's right, your biggest hitting ability is white damage and is not an auto crit. So you can hit for 120k with it, or you can miss and do 0k and cry in the corner waiting for 18 seconds until it comes off cooldown again. Your single target DPS is pretty bad, but to make matters worse, your AoE is also really bad. So killing a tank healer that way is also not really an option either. And because of all that, even your theoretically good matchups versus sorcerers, who rule the current meta right now, are not really that good. Because you don't have the overall DPS to really kill them 1v1. In many cases, they can just stand there and off-heal your damage until Electronet expires. And if all that did not scare you away, get your infamous bounty hunter helmets, inspired by the Mandalorian, ready, and let's learn about the Arsenal Mercenary. So when it comes to key abilities, Tracer Missile, of course, is your main filler and is very important because it will put heat signature on your target, which reduces the armor and buffs the damage that the enemy takes from other abilities. Priming Shot puts the mark debuff on your target, which makes them take 5% more damage from your ranged attacks. Also, with the right tactical, this one is your main heavy hitter and can crit for up to 120k in the right circumstances. The third key ability is Blazing Bolts. As of patch 7.3.1, this one is now always castable while moving, which is of course very good for PvP. Also, it keeps the enemies from moving because it applies a 70% slow over the duration of the channel. Really OP against melee. Finally, Arsenal has two important passives. The first one is the High Velocity Gas Cylinder. This one gives you free armor pen and free alacrity, which is important. We will see that in a second when we get to the stats. And then finally, I chose to pick out Supercharged Gas. Technically, it's now called High Velocity Supercharged Gas. That's the one for Arsenal, which gives you an auto crit with your implant that we're going to talk about in a second. It gives you more extra armor penetration and even some extra alacrity, but most importantly, it also vents heat. So it kind of has a quadruple purpose and it's very important overall for the class. Okay, so these are the legendary implants you want to be using. The first one I almost always take. It is called Concentrated Fire and makes it so that when you activate your supercharged gas, your next rail shot will be an auto crit. So very good, almost always run this. And then you can really choose between two. The first one would be Overcharged Cells, which makes it so that Priming Shot now gives you 3 stacks of Supercharge. So more Supercharge means more auto crit and better heat management, so this one is a very good option for overall DPS. However, Second Wind is a very strong contender, and recently I have been running this one. It will give you, of course, some extra sustain when you or your teammates kill an enemy as long as you damage them within the last seconds. And then also on kill or assist, you get a nice movement speed buff that actually lasts quite long and can help you reposition in a fight. So this one might actually be the better option as long as you're in a war zone where people are regularly dying. I don't really recommend using Target Eliminator. That's just a 2% damage buff, but I think overall you might as well just use Overcharged Cells that will give you more. When it comes to tacticals, as I said, this is a 2-for-1 guide. So I will recommend 2 tacticals, both of which have quite different playstyles and also different utility builds. But the first one is Burning Bright. And of course, this one makes it so when you use your Blazing Bolts, you get stacking buff, stacks 4 times, and each of them buffs the damage of your priming shot by 25%. Obviously, this is huge. This affects your opener, so we'll talk about that in a second. But this is the tactical you want to run if you want to go for maximum single target damage and burst. The second one is kind of memey, but it is the tactical that I use to get my 15k DPS on Mercenary, and it is of course Gyroscopic Stabilizers. So this one has multiple effects, but basically it buffs your death from above, reduces the cooldown by 20 seconds, which is a lot, and buffs the damage as long as your targets are affected by heat signature of Tracer Missile. There's also Primed Ignition, which is the best single target tactical for PvE, but in PvP, I mean, I've played with it a couple of times, I've gotten 14k DPS games. It is really only good if people are standing in the place, not vanishing out, not using many defensive cooldowns, because similar to Stormwatch, once you put it on a target, then you kind of have to keep casting on that target to really make value out of the tactical. And in PvP, if the enemies know a little bit what they're doing, they're not just going to stand around and let you free cast on them. So this tactical seems way better than it actually is in PvP, which is why I don't recommend that you use it. Looking at the gear, we are just going to be running any set of modded legacy gear, 332 or 336 mods. Doesn't really matter, your stats will be the same. And then you pick up some relics from the PvP vendor as well as an earpiece. So just copy the ones I have here and you're going to be good to go. More importantly, and this is where Mercenary is a little bit different from other combat styles in the game, are your stats or the stat distribution that you want to run. And this is because Arsenal Mercenary gets 3% alacrity passively from the high velocity gas cylinder, which means you only need a little bit more than 1123 alacrity to reach the 1.4 GCD breakpoint. So me, I am running 1 enhancement, my second wind implant, and then 1 extra augment. That is not really needed, but the extra alacrity augment helps to keep your global cooldowns more consistent, especially if you have a bad connection and quite a high ping. But theoretically, as long as you have more than 1122, you should be good to go. Then on the side of accuracy, you really want at least 1100, which you should get with 2 enhancements. That will give you 5% accuracy. Me, I also run the yellow stim because crit and accuracy are both very important. On the side of accuracy, most of your burst and actually most of your overall damage is in Blazing Bolts, Rail Shot, and Priming Shot, all of which are white damage. So you really need accuracy. The one that I run is around 1400, which gives me around 6% accuracy. You would really like to have more if possible, especially in the current meta where people are playing a lot of tanks and sorcerers. But you also really need to have a lot of crit, because crit is really good for Mercenary. Most of your attacks are not auto crits, so a high critical chance will make your burst overall more reliable. And also Arsenal gets a free 30% extra critical damage from your level 60 passive called Target Tracking, which makes critical rating even more valuable. So these are the stats I run, copy them and you will be good to go. When it comes to the builds, we're going to start on the left side. So this build you want to run with the Burning Bright Tactical. And you can see the synergy immediately when you look at the level 23 utility called Signature Shot. Signature Shot makes it so that when the target has the heat signature, again from your Tracer Missile, they will take an extra 50% damage from Priming Shot. So that is huge, and it's going to make your Priming Shot hit really, really hard. This one was also changed to now also include Rail Shot, so that's going to be a nice little buff, 10% extra damage for Rail Shot. At level 27, I take Power Barrier. This one gives you a 6% damage reduction that you can almost always have up. Maybe in Arena you can go for the Hunter-Killer droid, formerly known as Stealth Scan if you're playing versus a lot of assassins, but usually I like Power Barrier. At level 39, we go for the extra crit on Heatseekers. And then at 43, I always take Chaff Flare, because that's another defensive cooldown, which of course is very important in PvP. At level 51, Energy Rebounder makes it so when you take damage, your cooldown on Energy Shield is reduced. Energy Shield, of course, is one of your most important defensive cooldowns. We're going to talk about that in a second as well. So it's good to have it up more often. Level 64, so this row was also changed in patch 7.3.1. Now we always take Kolto Surge here, also known as Super Kolto. Previously, we had to take Thrill of the Hunt, which allowed us to cast Blazing Bolts while moving, but now we always have that baseline, so we are free to take Kolto Surge, which is going to make your Kolto heal you up to 60% and twice as fast, so it makes it really hard to die through that, so a really strong utility. Power Shield is also good, maybe if you have a super good heal, but I wouldn't really recommend it. It's best to run Kolto, because that you can control yourself, your healer not really. And the new utility Tag and Bag is just kind of bad unless you really can free cast and you're never being attacked, then of course it is more DPS, but overall in PvP you will be a target, so I usually take Kolto Surge. At level 68 you do have a choice between Rocket Out and Reflect. This one depends very much on the war zone. Is it a war zone with a lot of open spaces where you can kite? Then go Rocket Out. Is it a war zone that is kind of tight and not so easy to escape, or maybe an arena? Then I would go Reflect. But for most matches, me personally, I prefer Rocket Out because it has both an offensive and a defensive purpose. At level 73, you are almost always going to take Trauma Regulators. This one is going to give you a 120k heal if it crits, so that's really OP. However, I want to mention Afterburners, which is a 4-second root on your Missile Blast on an 8-second cooldown. That is actually the highest uptime root in the game. So you can root people even longer and more often than Madness. And it can be quite OP in 1v1s against melees. So against good players and maybe in duels you want to take this one. But for all other purposes, go with Trauma Regulators, the heal when your shield expires. And then we're quickly going to talk about the changes for the AoE build. So we're going to run Gyroscopic Stabilizers, which is going to buff your death from above. And to make the AoE build really work, we need to take Triple Trace at level 23. This one makes it so that Tracer Missile will now fire 2 extra missiles, which, and that's important, will also apply Heat Signature to all the targets that are being hit. Why is that important? Well, before we get to that, first we look at level 27, where I would recommend you can run Sticky Dart, because it is another AoE attack and also a nice slow. And if your enemies are slowed, then it's easier to keep them in your death from above. So Sticky Dart can be quite okay. Now the important part is level 39. And here you are going to be running Thermonuclear Fusion. This one has multiple effects. First of all, it makes your fusion missile spread your heat signature. That one is not that reliable because fusion missile needs to be cast, so you can miss it sometimes. But more importantly, this talent also makes it so that Heatseekers fires additional quarter strength missiles at nearby targets. So from the description, sounds kind of okay. But did you know that additional means up to a maximum of 8 targets and nearby means within 20 meters? So that is quite strong for AoEing. And that's why we take Thermonuclear Fusion. And the goal of this build really is to put your heat signature on everyone. So we are back to where we were in patch 1.2, just after the game released. We are spamming Tracer Missile on everyone and then spreading our Heatseeker missiles throughout the whole enemy team. The rest of the build stays the same compared to Burning Bright. Okay, now let's talk about how to do damage, the Burning Bright opener. You want to pop Supercharge right away for the extra armor penetration and Electricity. And of course, you cannot have more than 10 stacks. So before the game starts, you want to build your stacks with your recharge ability and you never want to overcap. So pop it right away. Then Power Surge for an instant Tracer Missile, apply the Heat Signature and get the 50% buff for Priming Shot from Signature Shot. And then secondly, you are going to use another Tracer Missile. And that's mostly to stack your Tracer Lock passive. You need 3 Tracers in total to fully buff the damage of Rail Shot by 30%. So Tracer Missile followed by another Tracer Missile. Then finally, you are going to use Blazing Bolts. This one usually procs your relics and gives us stacks of Priming Bolts. So buffing the damage of your Priming Shot once more. Then we finally fire our priming shot, pray that it hits the target and crits. Afterwards, Heatseeker, ideally still under your relics, and hope that it crits as well. Then another Tracer Missile to get the final stack, and then we are going to use our Railshot auto crit. And then once you're in the fight, Burning Bright Mercenary really plays similar to APPT in the sense that you want to proc your barrage regularly. So what is barrage? Barrage is basically a passive, which makes it so that Tracer Missile and also Sweeping Blasters reset the cooldown of your Blazing Bolts, similar to how in APPT you can reset the cooldown of Railshot. And that makes it so that effectively your cooldown of Blazing Bolts, which is 14 seconds, is reduced to 8 seconds because you can reset it every 8 seconds. And Blazing Bolts is your main ability for sustaining DPS. So every 8 seconds, the most important thing is you want to use Tracer Missile or Sweeping Blasters to reset your Blazing Bolts. And you can kind of count that in your head. It's basically you proc Blazing Bolts and then you use it, and then you use 3 other abilities and then it's ready to proc again. So it's really similar to APPT, count to 4. It's basically just you proc, Blazing Bolts, 1, 2, 3. You proc again, Blazing Bolts, 1, 2, 3. Proc again. Good, easy enough. The next highest priority is of course to use Blazing Bolts before the next proc. This one also gives you the 4 stacks for your priming shot, which is then the next high priority. Priming shot and Railshot, again, Railshot you really only want to do if you have 5 stacks of Tracer Lock to really maximize the damage. And make sure that priming shot and Railshot are not wasted, so you don't use them into any defensive cooldowns, because those 2 abilities are going to make up a large part of your damage, and if you miss them, your DPS is going to be really sad. Okay, the next highest priority is Heatseeker Missiles. In the Burning Bright build, this one doesn't do the best damage, but at least it is yellow damage, so you're not going to miss it all that often. But make sure when using Heatseeker on cooldown that you don't overheat, and if you get close to overheating, then feel free to throw in some rapid shots in order to kind of get that heat down again. Now the priority for the gyroscopic stabilizers build are a little bit different. So how do you play this build? Well, I already said in the beginning, the most important thing is to spread your heat signature on as many targets as possible. So you're gonna run in and you can pop your power surge for that instant tracer missile if you see enemies, maybe 2 or 3 clumped up somewhere. And you really want to get your heat signature on as many targets as possible. So if you can go tracer and to an instant power surged fusion missile to spread the heat signature and get the dot from fusion missile on the targets, then that's great. But if that's not the case, really just tap target, get your heat signature on maybe 3 or 4 people, and then go into the priority, which is Death from Above, which is going to be buffed by 25% if the target has the heat signature. So use that whenever you see 2 or more people stacked. And if not, then use Heatseeker, which is going to be your next priority. And that one will fire a bunch of rockets everywhere and also looks super cool in my opinion. So if all of that is on cooldown and everyone that you can reach has a heat signature, then feel free to use Fusion Missile or Sticky Dart for AoE, and then finally Sweeping Blasters. Don't forget that also in this build you are supposed to do a single target priority, and that one is very similar again to the priority that we discussed for the Burning Bright build. So keep using Blazing Bolts if there's no AoE to be had, and then reset Barrage every 8 seconds. And just follow the single target priority. Alright, taking a look at the defensive cooldowns. The first one that I typically use is Chaff Flare. This one gives you a 35% melee and range defense buff for 6 seconds. Interrupt immunity on top of that, which is quite nice. And it also absorbs 2 forced tech attacks. Has only a 45 second CD, so low cooldown. This one is what I usually pop first. Next, Energy Shield is of course 25% damage reduction. But as Arsenal, you also have the heal from Trauma Regulators. So as long as enemies keep hitting into it, you will build these stacks. And once the shield expires, you'll get a big juicy heal. That's quite nice. Of course, from your energy rebounder, as we discussed, you get cooldown reduction on the shield every time you get hit. So pop this when you expect to get hit. Of course, Arsenal Mercenary also has the Warzone Adrenal for 15% damage reduction and the Warzone Medpack, but keep in mind that the Warzone Medpack can be used only once per fight. Next, Rocket Out if you took it. It's a little bit annoying that this cannot be used when you're rooted, which is going to be quite a lot. But at least it now comes with the old smokescreen utility baseline built in, meaning that after you rocket out, you cannot be pulled and PowerTechs or Guardians cannot leap to you. So that is nice and can be quite powerful. Next, responsive safeguards, aka Reflect. If you took this one, then what it will do, it is basically absorbing all incoming direct single target damage. So no AoEs, no dots, and reflects 50% back. And then also heals you for 5% of your HP each time it absorbs an attack. But don't pop this too late, because as I said, dots and AoE attacks will not be absorbed and they can still kill you. Finally, you have your Kolto Overload. And with the Kolto Surge talent, this one will heal you up to 60% and twice as fast as the normal Kolto, so it's really hard to die through this. But again, don't pop it if you're at 1 HP, because then it's too late and you can die. And also has a 3-minute cooldown, so use this as your last resort. Alright, last but not least, some Arsenal tips and tricks. The first one, and I guess many of you already know this, but I still see people not doing that, is to spam Kolto Shot on yourself when you have downtime or you're overheated, because each Kolto Shot will give you 1 stack of supercharge. So if there's nothing better to do, spam Kolto Shot on yourself. The second tip is to click off Energy Shield to prematurely trigger the Trauma Regulator's heal. Now normally, Energy Shield heals you when it expires after 15 seconds, but what if they kill you before that? Well, if you think that is going to happen, it can be better to click off the Energy Shield buff to trigger the heal prematurely, rather than die through the shield. But make sure to click off the Energy Shield buff, you cannot click off the green Trauma Regulators buff. Tip number 3, Rocket Out grants you CC immunity for the duration of the dash. So, if you time it right, it can mean that an enemy will waste their hard stun. And of course, after you leap, you are also immune to pulls and leaps. Next, you can use Rocket Out offensively to chase down someone. Basically, what you want to be doing is move in a straight line, hold down W, and then first use the left mouse button to turn your camera. And that is so you make sure that the camera is exactly at a 180-degree angle. Then you use right click and whatever keybind you have for Rocket Out in quick succession. This is because Rocket Out will always propel you backwards based on the direction that your character is facing. So in the last second before using Rocket Out, you want to turn your character with the right mouse button while still holding down the W key. Then you use Rocket Out and then finally turn around and continue chasing your enemy. And the last tip is something I found out when I was practicing my mercenary on the dummy, and that is that priming shot has quite a long delay between you using the skill and the damage registering. And you can see here the animation of priming shot. My character kind of does this fancy sidestep back, and then the priming shot missile fires, and then the damage goes off. And if you look at the combat log, what is actually happening, there is a time of sometimes more than a second between me using the ability and the damage registering on the target. And I noticed that you can shorten this by using disabling shot, which is your interrupt directly after priming shot. So if we take another look at the combat log, here is me canceling the animation of priming shot with this disabling shot. And you can see the time it took for the damage to register is just 0.1 seconds, so quite fast. Now you could of course say this is a waste of your interrupt, you might rather use it on a heal, but let's be honest, many of you are not doing that anyway. So this is just a little trick that sometimes can secure you a kill and make sure that you get your priming shot damage off before the enemy uses a defensive cooldown or line of sights you. By the way, I also tested this one with rail shot, but it's really not worth it there because rail shot is already pretty fast. And Heatseeker, which is actually mega slow, but you can't cancel the animation, at least not from what I found in testing. So you just kind of have to live with the fact that Heatseeker is quite slow. But you can use that to your advantage if you combo Heatseeker with a fast priming shot or Heatseeker into rail shot. Then the slow Heatseeker missile will hit almost at the same time as your fast priming shot. So that's a little bit better for burst. And that's it for today, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. let me know in the comments below what class guide or other content you want to see next on the channel. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please remember to leave it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.